The galaxy's deadliest hunters live by one sacred law: the worthy are killed, never caged. And on a frozen world at the edge of nowhere, they finally met prey they could not kill, so they broke the law and took it alive. Now the ghost of Sparta sits chained in the black hold of a hunter ship, stripped of his weapons, carved open night after night so they can measure the bottom of his endurance. The hunters believe they have caged a god. They are wrong. For decades, this god has caged something far worse, a monster he buried so his son would never see it, and every wound the hunters inflict to study his rage is loosening the chains on the one thing he has spent his whole life holding down. They wanted to know what their prey was capable of. They are about to find out, and so, to his grief, is he. The hunt was already 3 hunters dead, before the clan understood that something had gone terribly wrong. They had come to the frozen world for sport, the way their kind had come to 1,000 worlds before, a hunting party of the galaxy's deadliest predators, blooded and cloaked and certain, drawn by the promise of worthy prey in a wilderness of black pine and endless snow. Their instruments had flagged it days ago, a life form of unusual strength somewhere in the white nothing below, an old male traveling alone, powerful enough to register, and yet, by every reading they trusted, only one. A solitary thing, aging, outnumbered before the hunt even began. It was meant to be a clean kill, a fine trophy, a quick blooding, the kind of routine sport that filled the long dark between true challenges. That was the first lie the snow told them. And by the time they understood it was a lie, 3 of them were already cooling in the drifts, and the survivors were learning, far too late, the difference between one and enough. The old man had not run. That was the wrongness, the thing that crawled up the spines of beings who had never in their long and bloody lives felt anything crawl up their spines before. Prey ran. That was the entire shape of the universe as the hunters understood it. The strong pursued, the weak fled, and the worthiness of a kill was measured in the quality of the chase. They had hunted screaming colonists and roaring beasts and even other warriors, and every one of them in the end had run, had felt the cloaked death closing in and obeyed the oldest instinct that life possessed: to flee, to survive. The old man in the snow had heard them coming, and he had simply turned around. He stood in a clearing of black pine, a broad and scarred figure in furs gone gray with frost, an old battle axe across his back, and a stillness about him that the lead hunter, even now, even with 3 of his brothers dead, could not make sense of. The thing did not have the bearing of prey. It had the bearing of something that had been hunted before by worse, and had buried the worse in the cold ground and walked away. When the first young blood had decloaked and lunged, the textbook kill, the honored opening strike, the old man had not flinched, had not cried out, had not done a single thing that prey was supposed to do. He had caught the wrist blade in one scarred hand, and broken the arm that held it, and put the young hunter down into the red snow with an economy so total, so cold, that it looked less like combat than like a man performing a chore he had performed 10,000 times and had long since stopped feeling. They had killed him for it, or tried to. The second hunter's plasma caster had screamed across the clearing, and the old man had moved, not with the desperate speed of prey, but with the trained, conserving efficiency of something that understood exactly how much motion a kill required, and refused to spend an ounce more. He did not dodge so much as he was not where the shot was, and then he was inside the hunter's guard, and the old battle axe had come off his back in a single fluid arc, and the second hunter learned what the frozen edge of a leviathan's blade did to even a yautja's armor. Cold. The blade carried cold, a frost that bit deeper than the wound itself, that crawled into the hunter's systems and slowed them, froze them, killed the regeneration their kind relied upon before the body even understood it was dying. The hunters had faced fire before. They had faced acid and energy and the weapons of 100 worlds. They had never faced a weapon that made the cold into a predator. And the second hunter died not understanding what had killed him, frozen from the wound outward in the red and white ruin of a clearing that was supposed to have been an easy blooding. 3 dead then, and the survivors did the thing their creed demanded, the thing that had never once failed them in the long history of the hunt. They stopped playing. They brought the full weight of the clan to bear. More of them decloaked from the tree line, veterans now, not young bloods, hunters who had taken the skulls of worth. Why prey across a dozen worlds? And they came at the old man from every angle at once, the coordinated killing geometry that had brought down beasts the size of buildings. Plasma fire crossed the clearing in a lethal lattice. Smart discs sang through the frozen air. Netting launchers, blade staves, the full and terrible arsenal of a hunting clan that had decided, with cold professional finality, that the routine sport had become a true hunt and would be ended as one. And the old man walked into it. That was the image the survivors would carry, the image that would later make even the clan's elders go silent in the dark of the ship. The old, gray-bearded male walking into the full firepower of a yautja war party as though it were a hard rain, the frost axe carving, the scarred hands breaking, methodical and patient and utterly without fear. He did not roar. He did not rage. There was no fury in it at all, and that was the worst part, the part that turned the hunt cold in the survivors' chests, because the hunters knew rage, respected rage, had built their whole culture around the glorious fury of the worthy kill. This was not that. This was something they had no word for. This was a craftsman at a workbench. This was a man doing arithmetic with their lives, spending exactly as much violence as each of them was worth, and not a fraction more, and finding most of them worth very little. A 4th hunter died. A 5th. The lattice of plasma fire that should have reduced any prey in the galaxy to ash broke against a being who had walked through the fire of gods in temples these hunters would never dream of, and the clan that had come for routine sport found itself, impossibly, losing. It was the eldest who called the change. From the high ground at the clearing's edge, the clan's most ancient hunter, a scarred and towering veteran of more worthy kills than any living member of the clan, the holder of the deepest trophy wall, the one whose word was law, watched 4, 5, 6 of his finest die against a single aging male who would not run and could not be felled, and the eldest understood, with the cold clarity of 1,000 years of the hunt, a thing that no yautja was ever supposed to have to understand. That this prey could not be killed, not by his clan, not today, perhaps not ever. And in that understanding, the eldest did the thing that broke the oldest law his people possessed. The hunt has one sacred shape, and every hunter learns it before he learns to walk. The worthy are killed. The kill is the entire point, the clean death, the honored trophy, the skull taken in combat and hung as proof of a worthiness earned. To capture worthy prey, to cage it rather than kill it, was not merely forbidden. It was an obscenity, a thing whispered about in the clan's darkest histories, a dishonor so total that the hunters who had done it in ages past had their names struck from the trophy walls forever. A hunter who cannot claim his kill is supposed to die trying. That is the creed. That is the whole of it. The eldest looked at the impossible prey butchering his clan in the red snow, and he chose the obscenity. Take it alive. The order rippled through the surviving hunters in clicks and growls, and even through their masks, even mid-slaughter, the survivors recoiled from it, because they understood what it meant, understood that their eldest had just spoken the forbidden word, had just chosen dishonor over death, had just decided that this prey was worth breaking the sacred law to possess. But the eldest's word was law, and the clan obeyed, and the hunt changed in an instant from a killing to a capture. The deadliest thing a yautja clan could do turned, for the first time in any of their lifetimes, toward the impossible goal of taking a worthy thing alive. They buried him under the entire weight of their technology. Netting launchers fired in volleys, monofilament cables strong enough to hold a charging beast wrapping the old man from a dozen directions at once. The clan abandoned the clean weapons and brought out the cruel ones, the containment tools, the things designed to subdue rather than slay, sonic disruptors that turned the air to agony, energy snares, the overwhelming saturating force of a clan that had stopped trying to win the fight and started trying only to hold its prey down. They sacrificed more of their own to do it. The old man broke the first net, and the second, and took 2 more hunters with him as he did. But there is a limit to what even a god can do against an enemy that has stopped caring whether it dies and cares only about burying him. And the cables came faster than he could break them, and the disruptors turned his own strength against him. And slowly, terribly, the impossible prey was pulled down into the red snow beneath the accumulated weight of a clan that had thrown away its honor to take him. And here was the thing the survivors would never be able to explain, the thing that hunted the smartest of them long after. At the end, when the nets had him, when the cables had wrapped his arms and the disruptors had driven him to one knee in the bloody snow, when the surviving hunters closed in with the chains they had never in their lives expected to use on living prey, the old man stopped fighting. He did not collapse. He did not surrender in the way of a beaten thing. He simply stopped all at once, the cold, methodical violence going still, and knelt there in the chains of his captors with his head bowed and his breathing even, and let them take him. Let them lock the heavy restraints onto wrists that had just broken half their clan. Let them bind the frost axe away. Let them haul him, unresisting, toward the dropship that would carry him up into the dark. A god in chains, walking docilely into a cage, after butchering a third of the hunting party that came for him. The survivors told themselves it was the disruptors, the exhaustion, the sheer weight of what they had thrown at him. They told themselves they had won. But the eldest, watching his impossible prize kneel willingly into its chains, felt the first cold finger of a doubt he could not name. Because he had hunted worthy things for 1,000 years, and he knew the difference between a creature that has been beaten and a creature that has decided to stop. And the old man in the snow had not been beaten. The hunters had not overpowered him. They had not broken him. He had butchered them until the precise moment he chose not to. And then he had knelt, calmly, deliberately, with the eerie patience of a thing that had nowhere it needed to be and all the time in the world to be there. Why? That was the question that should have stopped the eldest cold, the question that should have made him reconsider the obscenity he had just committed. A being that powerful, that impossible to kill, why had it let them take it? Why would a god who could walk through their fire and freeze their blood and butcher their clan choose at the end to kneel into the chains of his enemies and let himself be carried up into the dark of a hunter ship? There were only 2 answers, and the eldest, in his pride, in his 1,000 years of certainty, chose the wrong one. He told himself the prey had submitted. He told himself the clan had triumphed. He told himself that what knelt in the chains was a conquered thing, a trophy that had merely refused to die, and that the obscenity of capturing it would be redeemed by the glory of possessing it. He did not let himself consider the other answer, the one the smartest hunter in the clan would arrive at, far too late in the dark of the hold, the one written plainly in the calm, patient, terrible stillness of the old man kneeling in the bloody snow. That the god had not been captured at all. That the god had allowed it, had looked at the clan that could not kill him, and the ship that would carry him into the dark, and had made a decision of his own, for reasons of his own, that had nothing to do with surrender. That whatever this old man was, he had walked into their cage on purpose. The way a man walks calmly into a room, he intends to leave very differently than he entered it. The dropship rose into the frozen sky, carrying its impossible prize up toward the hunter ship waiting in orbit, and the red snow of the clearing held the bodies of a third of the clan that had come for routine sport, the first blood price of a dishonor that had only just begun to be paid. And in the belly of the rising ship, chained in the dark, the old man with the scarred hands and the gray beard opened his eyes, and in them was no fear and no defeat and no surrender of any kind. There was only the cold, patient, waiting calm of the ghost of Sparta. And somewhere far below, in the place he had spent decades learning to keep locked, something old and terrible and hungry stirred for the first time in years and began, very quietly, to wake. There is a particular darkness inside a hunter ship, and it had never, in all its long service, held a thing it was afraid of, until now. The hold was a cathedral of iron and shadow, deep in the belly of the clan vessel, a place built to cage the worthy beasts the hunters sometimes carried between worlds, reinforced, soundproofed, ringed with restraints that had held creatures the size of buildings. It was cold. Everything aboard a hunter ship was cold, the way the void is cold, and the dark of the hold was the deepest cold of all. And at the center of it, beneath a single shaft of pale light that fell from somewhere high in the gloom, the old man knelt in his chains and did not move. They had taken everything from him. The frost axe was locked away in the ship's armory, sealed behind blast doors and the clan's most paranoid wards, because the survivors of the clearing had seen what it did and would not sleep in the same vessel as a weapon left within reach of that thing. They had bound his arms in restraints designed to hold a charging Grendel, layered and redundant, anchored to the iron of the ship itself. They had stripped him of his furs, searched him, cataloged every scar on a body that carried more scars than any creature the clan had ever examined, old wounds, ritual wounds, the marks of a life so saturated in violence that the hunter's own scarred veterans looked at his flesh and went quiet. And on his forearms, they found the thing that none of their instruments could explain. Chains, not the restraints they had put on him, other chains older, seared directly into the flesh of his arms. The metal fused to the muscle as though it had been there for a very long time, as though it had grown into him or he had grown around it. The hunter's biomask scanned the embedded chains and returned nothing they understood, no power source, no mechanism, no purpose their science could name, only a faint, cold reading at the edge of their sensors, like the residual heat of a fire long banked but never quite extinguished. They did not know what they were looking at. They did not know that they were looking at the blades of chaos, the cursed weapons of a god, bound to his very body, the physical scar of the monster he had once been. They knew only that the old man's arms carried chains he had not been given, and that the chains were warm in a hold where nothing else was. The hunters were not stupid. They left those arms in the heaviest restraints they had. The clan's elders convened over their prize in the chamber above the hold, and the meeting was not a celebration. It should have been they had taken worthy prey alive, an impossible thing, a trophy unlike any in the clan's long history. But there was no triumph in that chamber. There was unease, the particular unease of beings who have done something forbidden and are beginning, in the quiet, to feel the weight of it. It cannot be classified. This from the clan's keeper of records, an old hunter whose entire function was to catalog the worthy things they killed. He brought up the readings on the chamber's displays, the scans of the captive, the data from the clearing, the impossible numbers. I have cataloged the prey of 40 worlds. I have a name and a category for every worthy thing this clan has ever hunted. I have nothing for this. The displays flickered through the contradictions. It bleeds. Its physiology is broadly humanoid, bone, muscle, blood, all of it familiar. By every structural reading, it should die as a man dies. And yet it walked through a war party's full firepower, took wounds that should have killed it a dozen times over, and closed those wounds before our eyes. It bleeds like a man and it endures like a mountain. Those two things should not be true of the same creature. And the arms, the eldest asked. Unknown. Chains fused to the flesh carrying a faint energy our instruments cannot source. They predate the capture, they have been part of it for a long time. Beyond that, the keeper of records spread his hands, a gesture of profound discomfort from a being whose entire purpose was certainty. I cannot tell you what they are, only that I do not like them, and that I would advise this clan with everything I have learned in a lifetime of study, not to remove the restraints from those arms. The eldest sat in silence, considering his impossible prize, and the doubt that had first touched him in the snow had not faded in the hours since. It had grown, because the eldest had broken the most sacred law of his people to take this thing alive, and a hunter who breaks the creed needs, more than anything, for the breaking to have been worth it, needs the prize to justify the dishonor. And the longer he looked at the data, the less certain he became that he understood what he had caged. It has not spoken, the eldest said. It has not raged. It butchered a third of this clan and then it knelt into its chains, and since we brought it aboard it has done nothing. It does not test the restraints. It does not roar. It does not beg. He looked at the others. Worthy prey, when caged, fights. It rages against the bars. That is the nature of the worthy. They do not accept the cage. This thing accepts it. Why? No one in the chamber had an answer. No one, that is, except the hunter standing at the chamber's edge, the youngest of the elders' circle, the clan's sharpest reader of the biomask data, a hunter whose talent had always been less for the kill than for the understanding of the killed. He had said nothing through the entire meeting. He had been watching the captive on the hold's interior feed, watching the old man kneel in the pale light, and a cold understanding had been assembling itself in him that he did not yet have the courage to speak aloud. His name, rendered roughly from the clicks of his tongue, was a word that meant something close to one who reads the signs, and he had been reading the signs since the Klee. Aring, and he did not like what they spelled. You ask why it accepts the cage, the young hunter said finally, and the elders turned to him. You assume it is because the thing is beaten, submissive, a conquered creature that has accepted its captivity. He stepped forward into the chamber's light, and his voice was careful, the voice of a hunter who knows he is about to say something the elders will not want to hear. I do not think that is what we are looking at. I have watched it for 3 hours. I have read every measurement we have taken. He brought up his own data on the display, the captive's vitals, its physiological readings, the patterns. And I am telling you, elders, that the thing in the hold is not submitting to anything. It is concentrating. Explain, the eldest said. The young hunter pointed at the readings. A beaten creature's body shows it. The heart slows, the muscles slacken. The fear chemistry floods the blood, then ebbs into the dullness of a thing that has given up. We have all seen it 1,000 times. It is the signature of defeat, and it is unmistakable. He let that sit. The captive shows none of it. Its heart is slow, but not the slowness of defeat. It is the slowness of control, the deliberate, trained calm of a thing holding itself at a precise and chosen level. There is no fear chemistry in its blood. None. A creature in chains, surrounded by its enemies, stripped of its weapons, and it shows no fear at all. He turned to face the elders fully. And its muscles are not slack. They are held. Watch it on the feed. It does not slump in its chains like a beaten thing. It kneels with the posture of a warrior in meditation, perfectly still, perfectly balanced, every line of it disciplined. That is not a creature that has accepted captivity, elders. That is a creature that is exerting effort, enormous, constant, deliberate effort to keep itself still. The chamber had gone quiet. On the feed, the old man knelt in his pale shaft of light, utterly motionless, his head bowed. And now that the young hunter had named it, the elders could see it too, the terrible stillness of him. A stillness that was not absence but presence, not emptiness but a tremendous held tension, like the surface of deep water over something vast and moving in the dark below. Effort to do what? The keeper of records asked, and there was a new note in the old hunter's voice now, a note that had not been there before. "I do not know," the young hunter admitted, "but I have read the body language of worthy prey my entire life, and I know what I am seeing even if I cannot name it. The thing in the hold is holding something down, something inside itself. Every measurement we have says so, the control, the discipline, the constant exertion of a creature spending tremendous energy not to act." He looked at the feed, at the silent kneeling god, and his next words came slow and cold. "We did not capture a raging beast that we must keep caged. We captured a calm one. And in my experience, elders, a calm that takes that much effort to maintain is far more dangerous than any rage, because rage burns itself out. That," he gestured at the still figure, "is not burning out. That is being held, deliberately, by a will I cannot measure. And I find myself wondering what happens to all of us if that will ever decides to let go." The eldest stared at the feed for a long moment, and the doubt in him, the cold finger that had touched him in the snow, that had grown through the long hours since, finally found its shape in the young hunter's words. A calm that takes effort to maintain. A thing holding something down. He had broken the creed to capture worthy prey, expecting a trophy that would justify the dishonor, and the young hunter was telling him, in the careful language of one who reads the signs, that they had not caged a beast. They had caged a door. And on the other side of it was something the calm old man was working very hard to keep shut. But the eldest was old and proud, and 1,000 years of certainty does not bend easily. He had paid too high a price already, a third of his clan dead in the snow, his honor struck through with the obscenity of capture, and a hunter who has paid that much cannot easily accept that his prize might be a mistake. So he did the thing that pride does. He chose, again, the more comfortable answer. "Or," the eldest said slowly, "it is a disciplined warrior who knows it cannot escape and conserves its strength and waits for an opening that will not come. Discipline is not the same as a hidden monster, young one. You read signs well, but you also fear what you do not understand, and fear invents threats where there are only puzzles." He rose. "We have done the forbidden thing. We have taken worthy prey alive. The dishonor of that is real, and it will be redeemed in only one way, by understanding this creature so completely that the knowledge we wring from it is worth th. Law we broke, we will study it. We will learn what it is, how it endures, where the limit of it lies." He looked at the feed, at the silent god, with the cold resolve of a being talking himself past his own doubt. "And if there is something it is holding down, as you fear, then we will find that too. We will find the bottom of this creature, all of it." The young hunter felt the cold settle deeper into him, because he understood what the eldest had just ordered, and he understood why it was the worst possible thing the clan could do. "Eldest," he said carefully, "if I am right, if it is holding something down, then studying it the way we study prey, hurting it to find its limit, is not how we learn what it is." He chose the words like a hunter choosing footing on ice. "It is how we find out what is on the other side of the door, and I do not think we want to be standing here when it opens." But the eldest had already decided. A clan that breaks its creed must justify the breaking, and the only justification was knowledge, And the only way the hunters knew to wring knowledge from a worthy thing was the way they had always done it, through the body, through endurance, through the precise application of pain that measured exactly how much a creature could bear. The order went out. The study would begin. And the young hunter, the one who read the signs, the only one in the clan who had looked at the silent god and seen the truth of him, was overruled. The way the ones who read the signs correctly are so often overruled and left to watch what his clan was about to do. He went down to the hold alone before it began. He told himself it was to take more readings. In truth, he wanted to look at the thing the way one looks at a coming storm, to stand before the cage and try, one more time, to understand what his clan had caught. The old man knelt in his shaft of pale light, motionless, the embedded chains warm on his scarred arms, the heavy restraints anchored to the iron of the ship. And as the young hunter approached the bars, the captive did something he had not done since they brought him aboard. He lifted his head, and he opened his eyes, and he looked at the hunter who read the signs directly, knowingly, with a gaze that was not the gaze of a beaten thing or a raging beast, but something far worse, something ancient and patient and tired beyond the telling of it. And the young hunter, who had spent his life reading the eyes of the worthy, looked into the eyes of the old man in the chains, and felt every instinct he possessed scream a single warning. That he was not looking at prey, that he had never been looking at prey, that the thing his clan had caged was looking back at him with the calm, weary recognition of a predator who has already counted every hunter on the ship, already measured every chain, already decided exactly how this would end, and was simply, patiently, waiting. And then the old man spoke, the first words he had said since the snow. 3 words, low and rough and quiet, in a language the young hunter's mask should not have been able to translate, and somehow did 3 words that the hunter who read the signs would hear in his nightmares for whatever was left of his life. You should run. The study began, and it was the most dishonorable thing the clan had ever done, and the most futile. They told themselves it was research. That was the word the eldest used, the word that let a culture of honorable killers do a thing their entire creed forbade. They would not torture a worthy captive. No, they would study it, learn it, wring from its impossible body the knowledge that would justify the law they had broken to take it. They built the lie carefully, the way the powerful always build the lies that let them do what they want. But a lie does not change the shape of the thing it covers, and the shape of the thing the clan did in the dark of that hold was older and uglier than any word for it. They hurt him, methodically, clinically, with the cold patience of hunters who had stopped trying to kill their prey and started trying to measure it. They tested his endurance first, wounds, calibrated and catalogued, each one inflicted to chart how much damage the impossible body could absorb. And the body absorbed it. They tested his regeneration and watched in clinical fascination as wounds that would have killed any creature they had ever studied closed themselves before the biomasks could finish recording them. The old man's flesh knitting shut with a resilience that their instruments insisted should not exist. They tested the limit of his pain, applying the cruel tools of containment they had brought down from the armory, the sonic disruptors, the energy snares, the precise and terrible instruments of a clan that knew 100 ways to make a living thing suffer, searching, session after session, for the place where the creature would finally break. And through all of it, the old man made no sound. That was the first horror of the hold, the one that unsettled even the veterans who carried out the eldest's orders. They had tortured before not worthy prey, never that, but other things in other ages when the clan's history was darker than its songs admitted. They knew what suffering looked like. They knew the screams, the begging, the slow disintegration of a mind under enough pain, and the old man gave them none of it. He hung in his chains beneath the pale light and endured everything they did to him in total, absolute silence. Not the silence of unconsciousness, not the silence of a thing too broken to cry out, but the silence of a will so vast and so disciplined that it simply would not give them the sound. He looked at them while they did it. That was the part the hunters could not bear. He kept his eyes open, and he looked at each of them in turn, and there was no pleading in his gaze and no hatred either. Only a cold, patient, cataloging attention, as though it were not the old man being studied in that hold, but the hunters themselves. They were trying to find the bottom of him, and the old man was letting them search, the way a man lets a child search his pockets, knowing there is nothing in them the child is strong enough to take. The eldest watched the sessions and grew uneasy because nothing was breaking. He had expected, eventually, a crack, a scream, a plea, the slow collapse of even an impossible creature under enough sustained agony. It did not come. The old man endured and endured, and the eldest's unease curdled slowly toward something closer to fear, because a hunter understands instinctively that a thing which cannot be broken is a thing which cannot truly be possessed, and he had paid a third of his clan and the whole of his honor to possess this. But it was the young hunter, the one who read the signs, who saw the true horror first, because he was not watching the old man's silence. He was watching the data. He had set his instruments to track the one reading none of the others thought to follow, the faint, banked fire energy that radiated from T. He chains seared into the captive's arms, the warmth in a cold room, the residual signature the clan's science could not source. The others ignored it. It was a curiosity, an anomaly, irrelevant to the question of how much damage the body could take. But the young hunter had looked at the silent god in segment after segment and understood that the body was not the thing they should be measuring. The thing they should be measuring was whatever the old man was holding down. And the only window he had into that hidden thing was the warmth in the chains. So he watched the chains, and what the chains told him turned his blood to ice. They were getting warmer. Not steadily, in pulses. With each session of the study, each fresh application of pain, the banked fire signature in the embedded chains would spike, a surge of that cold, sourceless energy, climbing higher than the session before and then settle, but not all the way back down. Each time, it settled a little higher than where it had started. Session by session, wound by wound, the warmth in the old man's arms was rising, a slow and terrible climb that tracked with perfect and damning precision the clan's own escalating cruelty. The more they hurt him, the hotter the chains grew. The harder they pushed to break him, the more the hidden thing inside him fed. The young hunter ran the correlation a dozen times because he could not believe what it was telling him. But the data did not lie. The data was the clearest thing he had ever read. They were not breaking their prisoner. They were charging him. He understood it then all at once, the full and catastrophic shape of what his clan was doing. And the understanding was so terrible that he had to set down his instruments and stand for a moment in the cold dark, mastering himself before he could even speak it. Whatever the old man was holding down, the thing behind the door, the monster the silence was caging, it did not weaken under pain. It grew under pain. It was a fire, and the clan, in their dishonor and their pride and their desperate need to justify the law they had broken, had been pouring fuel onto it with both hands, session after session, mistaking the rising heat for progress when it was the precise opposite. Every wound they carved to find the creature's limit was not bringing them closer to breaking him. It was loosening the lock. He went to the eldest. Of course he went to the eldest. He was the one who read the signs, and a hunter who reads a coming catastrophe and says nothing is no hunter at all. He brought the data. He laid it out. The spiking warmth, the rising baseline, the perfect and damning correlation between the clan's cruelty and the climbing signature in the captive's chains. "Eldest," he said, and he did not soften it because there was no time left to soften it. "I told you it was holding something down. Now I can show you. This," he gestured at the climbing line on the display, the slow, terrible ascent, "is the thing it holds. And every session of the study makes it stronger. We are not breaking the creature. We are feeding whatever is inside it. The pain does not weaken it. The pain is fuel." He looked at the eldest, at the keeper of records, at the gathered elders, willing them to see it. "We have spent 3 days pouring strength into the one thing this creature is desperately trying to keep contained. The longer we continue, the more we charge it. And I do not know what happens when the charge is complete, but I know that the captive does, and I know that it is waiting for it. We have to stop. We have to stop now, before the thing it is holding finishes waking." And the eldest looked at the data, the climbing line, the rising fire, the clear and undeniable evidence. And the young hunter saw, for one moment, the doubt move across the ancient face, saw the eldest almost understand. And then he saw pride close over it, the way ice closes over deep water. Because the eldest could not stop. That was the trap the dishonor had built around him, the trap the young hunter had not fully understood until that moment. A hunter who breaks the sacred creed must justify the breaking, and the only justification was knowledge, and they did not have the knowledge yet. And to stop now would be to admit that he had thrown away a third of his clan and the whole of his honor for nothing, for a creature he could neither break nor understand. The eldest had paid too much to walk away empty, and a being who has paid too much will always choose to pay more, rather than admit that everything he has already spent was wasted. "The body will not break," the eldest said slowly, and there was a new resolve in his voice, a worse resolve, the resolve of a being talking himself past the last warning he will ever ignore. "You are right about that, one who reads the signs. We have carved it for 3 days and found no bottom to its endurance. The flesh is a wall we cannot breach." He rose, and his decision settled over the chamber like a shadow. "So we will stop breaking the flesh. Eldest, we will break the mind." The cold went all the way through the young hunter then, because he understood what the eldest had just decided, and he understood that it was the single worst thing the clan could possibly do. They had failed to find the creature's limit through its body. So now they would reach past the body, use the clan's deepest and most forbidden instruments, the ones that did not cut the flesh but invaded the self, the tools that could force a captive back into its own memories, tear open its mind, drag the hidden things out of the dark where it kept them. They would stop trying to break the wall around the monster. They would go looking for the monster directly. "Eldest, no," the young hunter said, and there was open dread in his voice now, the last desperate honesty of a being watching a catastrophe he cannot stop. "You do not understand what you are ordering. Everything I have shown you says the creature is holding something down, concealing it, caging it with all the discipline it has. If you reach into its mind, if you tear open the place where it keeps that thing locked, you will not be studying the monster, eldest. You will be releasing it. The discipline holding it down is the only thing keeping us alive. And you are about to order us to break the very lock the creature is begging us not to touch." But the eldest had already decided. A clan that breaks its creed must justify the breaking. The body had given them nothing, and the only path left to the knowledge that would redeem his dishonor ran straight through the captive's mind. The order went out. The forbidden instruments were brought down into the hold, and the young hunter, overruled again, the reader of signs ignored one final time, was left to watch his clan prepare to do the one thing that would finish what their cruelty had begun. They had spent 3 days charging the fire. Now they were going to reach into the old man's mind and tear open the place where he kept the thing the fire was for. The memory he had spent decades caging. The monster beneath the silence, the ghost. And in the hold, in his chains, the old man with the warm and rising chains felt the forbidden instruments being prepared, and understood what the hunters were about to reach for, and did the thing that frightened the young hunter most of all in that whole, long, terrible day. For the first time since the snow, the old man closed his eyes, not in fear, not in pain, but with the slow, resigned weariness of a man who has been holding a door shut for a very long time, and has just felt the last of the hinges begin to give. And somewhere deep beneath the silence, in the dark the hunters were about to pry open, the ghost of Sparta heard them coming. They reached into his mind, and they found a door, and they did the one thing the old man had spent his whole life begging the universe not to do. They opened it. The forbidden instruments came down into the hold, the cruelest tools the clan possessed, the ones their own history spoke of in shame, devices that did not cut the flesh but invaded the self, that could force a captive back into its own memories and tear open the locked rooms of a mind. They had been built for interrogation in ages the clan no longer admitted to. They had not been used in generations. And the eldest, unable to break the old man's impossible body, ordered them turned upon his mind, to find, at last, the thing the creature was holding down by reaching into the dark and dragging it into the light. The young hunter watched them attach the instruments and understood that he was watching the worst mistake his people had ever made, and that he was powerless to stop it. He had read the signs. He had shown them the data. He had told them, in every way he knew how, that the discipline holding the creature still was the only thing keeping them alive. And they had overruled him, because a clan that breaks its sacred law cannot stop until the breaking is justified. And so they would tear open the captive's mind to find their justification, and they would find, instead, the end of all of them. The instruments engaged, and the old man's mind opened like a wound. It did not happen the way the hunters expected. They had used the instruments in the old shameful days to pry secrets from captives, to force memories to the surface, to read the contents of a mind the way one reads a stolen scroll. They expected, perhaps, to find the creature's origins, its weaknesses, the source of its impossible power. They expected information. What they got, when the instruments tore open the door the old man had held shut for decades, was something none of their histories had prepared them for. They fell into his memory. All of them, the hunters in the hold, the young one at his instruments, even the eldest watching from above through the link the sea. Real devices forged. They were dragged down into the dark behind the old man's eyes, into the locked room he had spent his whole life guarding, and they saw what was inside. They saw the ghost. It came in fragments at first, the way a nightmare comes, images bleeding up out of a darkness older than the hunter's civilization. A younger man, a warrior, not gray and weary but powerful and proud, a general at the head of an army in a land of marble and olive trees. The hunters did not know the name of that land. They did not need to. They felt the weight of the memory, the saturation of violence, a life so steeped in war that it had no shape but the sword. And they felt the moment it all turned. The battlefield where the warrior, outnumbered and dying, called out to a god of war in his desperation and pledged himself, and the god accepted. They saw the chains. The hunters in the hold, who had scanned the embedded chains on the old man's arms and found only a banked fire they could not source, now watched those same chains being seared into his flesh in the memory. A god of war binding cursed blades to a mortal's arms, the metal fused to the muscle in a baptism of fire and pain, the warrior screaming as the weapons became part of his body forever. the blades of chaos. The hunters understood in that moment what they had been looking at on the old man's arms this whole time. Not an anomaly, not a curiosity, the brand of a servitude, the physical scar of the thing the warrior had agreed to become. And then they saw what the warrior became. The memory deepened, and the hunters were dragged with it, and the land of marble began to drown. They saw the warrior cut his way across his world with the cursed blades, a thing of pure and terrible violence, and they felt the bloodlust in it, not the honorable fury of the worthy kill that the hunters revered, but something darker, an appetite, a rage that fed on itself and grew with every life it took. The hunters of the clan, who prided themselves on the clean kill, who measured their worth in the honor of the hunt, recoiled from the memory of a being who did not hunt for honor at all, who simply killed, drowning in red, becoming less a warrior and more a storm with every step. And then the memory reached the village and the temple, and the hunters saw the thing the old man had spent decades caging, the thing beneath the silence, the wound at the bottom of the locked room. The god of war had tricked him. That was the horror the hunters fell into, the horror that even their alien hearts could feel the shape of. The warrior, drunk on the blood his patron's blades had let him spill, was loosed upon a village in the dark, his rage turned up to its full and terrible height. And in the red mist of that bloodlust, in a temple he did not recognize, he cut down two figures who tried to flee from him. And only when it was done, only when the rage finally receded and the storm cleared from his eyes, did the warrior see what the god of war had made him do. A woman, a child, his wife, his daughter. He had killed them with his own hands. The people he loved most in all the world, cut down in his own rage in the dark, by the cursed blades seared into his arms. And the god of war had arranged it, had loosed him deliberately upon the very thing he was meant to protect, to forge a perfect weapon out of a man with nothing left to lose. The hunters fell into the memory of the warrior kneeling in the temple over the bodies of his family, and they felt the precise moment something inside the man broke, not into grief, though the grief was bottomless, but into the cold and total ruin of a soul that had done the one thing it could never take back. And they saw the curse, the ashes of his murdered family, burned and bound to his skin by an oracle's curse, fusing to his flesh, turning it ash-white, marking him forever, a man wearing the remains of the family he had slaughtered, his own skin a monument to the worst thing he had ever done. The ghost of Sparta, that was the name the memory gave it. A creature born in a temple over two bodies, white as death, who would spend the centuries that followed drowning entire worlds in blood, butchering his way through the gods who had made him, leaving nothing but ruin and ash in his wake. Because a man who has killed the only thing he ever loved has nothing left to lose, and a thing with nothing to lose is the most terrible weapon in any universe. The hunters of the clan had wanted to find the bottom of their captive. They had wanted his breaking point, the place where enough pain would shatter him. And in the dark of his mind, they finally understood the mistake they had been making from the very beginning. The old man's breaking point was not the place where he shattered. He had already shattered, long ago, in a temple over two bodies, and there was nothing left in him to break that had not been broken centuries before. His breaking point was something else entirely, something the disciplined old father had spent decades holding shut with all the will he possessed. His breaking point was the place where he stopped holding back, the place where the ghost woke up, the place where the man who had learned, slowly and painfully, to cage the monster, to bury the cursed blades beneath the floorboards of a quiet life, to raise a son, to be something other than the storm, finally let the cage door swing open and became, once more, the thing that had drowned a world. And the clan had just spent 3 days, and the whole of their honor, prying that cage open. The young hunter saw it on his instruments before any of the others understood. The banked fire in the chains, the warmth he had tracked session after session, it was no longer climbing. It had arrived. The slow ascent of the past 3 days had reached its summit, the fire fully charged at last, fed by every wound the clan had carved and now blazing at the edge of his sensors like a sun about to be born. And the discipline, the constant, deliberate exertion he had measured from the first hour, the will holding the monster still, the young hunter watched that reading, the signature of a thing holding itself back, and saw it begin, for the first time, to fall. Not breaking, releasing. The old man was letting go. "Stop," the young hunter said, and then louder to the hold, to the elders, to anyone who would listen. "Stop the instruments, stop them now." He was on his feet, the data screaming in front of him. "You did not find his breaking point. There is no breaking point, do you understand? The creature broke 1,000 years ago, and there is nothing left in it to break. What you found is the place where it stops holding back, and you have just torn open the door it was holding shut." His voice cracked with the dread of a being watching a catastrophe arrive exactly as he had foretold it. The discipline is failing. The thing it was caging is waking. This was never a study. It was a seal, and we just broke it. Shut it down, shut all of it down before it. In the hold, the old man opened his eyes. And the silence broke. Not into a scream. The young hunter had braced for a scream, for rage, for the roar of a monster loosed. And what came instead was infinitely worse, because what came was nothing at all. The old man simply lifted his head in his chains, slow and deliberate, and the thing that looked out of his eyes now was not the disciplined captive who had endured 3 days of vivisection in patient silence. It was not the weary old father holding a door shut. It was something cold and ancient and utterly without mercy. A stillness that was not restraint anymore but intent. The terrible calm of a man who has made a decision he spent decades swearing he would never make again. He had decided to stop being a father. He had decided to become the ghost. "For 30 years, the old man said, and his voice was quiet and even, and it filled the hold like cold water filling a grave. "I have held this back. I buried it. I swore my son would never see it. I have spent every day of my life since that temple keeping the door shut because I know what is on the other side of it, and I have spent everything I have making certain it stays locked." His ash-pale eyes moved across the hunters in the hold, slow and patient, and without a trace of fear. "You could not kill me, so you chained me and you studied me, and when my body would not break, you reached into my mind and you tore open the one door I have given my life to keep shut." The chains seared into his arms began, for the first time, to glow a deep, banked, terrible orange, the fire fully woken at last, heat bleeding into the cold dark of a hold that had never known warmth. "You wanted to know what I was holding down. You wanted to find what I am capable of." The restraints, the layered, redundant restraints built to hold a charging beast, anchored to the iron of the ship itself, began, with a low groan of tortured metal, to strain. "You should not have looked for the monster," the ghost of Sparta said, "because now you have woken him, and he remembers what he is for." And in the chamber above the hold, the eldest finally felt the cold finger of doubt that had touched him in the snow close into a fist of pure terror, because he understood at last, far too late, what the young hunter had been telling him from the very first hour. He had not captured a god and studied it. He had taken the lid off something a god had spent 30 years holding down, and he had pried at it and fed it and charged it, and now it was loose in his ship, and there was nothing in all the clan's honor or weapons or history that could put it back. "What have we done?" the keeper of records whispered, staring at the glowing chains on the feed, the straining restraints, the cold ancient thing where their docile captive had been. The young hunter did not answer. There, was no answer left that mattered. He looked at the feed, at the ghost of Sparta waking in the dark of the hold, the cursed fire blazing and the chains seared to his arms, the restraints beginning to fail, and he understood that the dread he had carried since the clearing had finally, completely come due. "We woke it up," he said quietly. "Everything I warned you of. We did the one thing it begged us not to do." He looked at his eldest, at his clan, at the beings who had broken the sacred law and ignored every sign and were about to pay the full and terrible price. And now there is nothing left to do but die, and hope it is quick. In the hold, the first restraint snapped. The sound of it rang through the iron of the ship like a bell tolling, and the ghost of Sparta, free of one chain, rose slowly to his feet in the pale light, the cursed fire of the blades of chaos blazing in the dark, and turned his ancient, merciless eyes toward the bars of his cage, toward the hunters, toward the whole of the clan that had woken him. The lid was off, the monster was loose, and the deadliest hunters in the galaxy were about to learn what their dishonor had unleashed in their own ship, in the dark, with nowhere left to run. The deadliest hunters in the galaxy had spent their entire civilization learning to be the thing in the dark. Tonight, in the iron belly of their own ship, they learned what it was to be hunted by it. The first restraint had snapped, and the second followed it, and the third, the layered, redundant chains built to hold a charging Grendel, anchored to the bones of the vessel itself, came apart one after another as the ghost of Sparta rose to his feet in the pale light of the hold. He did not strain against them in fury. That was the horror the surviving hunters would carry, the same horror they had felt in the snow and refused to understand. There was no rage in it. He simply stood, and the chains that could not be broken broke, the way a thing breaks when something far stronger than it has decided it is done being held. The blades of chaos came off their bindings last. The hunters had locked the frost axe in the armory, behind blast doors and wards, certain that without his weapon the creature was diminished. They had not understood that his deadliest weapons were not in the armory. They were seared into his arms, and they had been there the whole time. The warm chains the instruments could not source, and now they woke. The cursed blades ignited in the dark of the hold, fire blooming along their lengths, primordial flame from a realm older than the hunter's species flooding a chamber that had only ever known the cold of the void. The hold filled with red and orange light, and the shadows of the iron cathedral danced, and the old man stood at the center of it, wreathed in the fire of a dead world's underworld, the chains running from his arms to the blades like the leashes of two burning beasts. The hunters in the hold drew their weapons. They were veterans, blooded killers, the finest the clan possessed. It did not matter at all. What happened in that hold, and then in the corridors beyond it, the survivors, and there would be almost none, would never be able to describe as a battle. A battle implies two sides. What the ghost of Sparta did to the clan that had caged him was not a battle. It was a reckoning, and it was delivered in the cold, total, surgical manner that was so much more terrifying than any rage the hunters had ever revered. That was the thing none of them were prepared for. The hunters knew fury. Their entire culture was built around the glorious, honest fury of the worthy kill, the roar, the charge, the heat of combat. They had expected, when the monster woke, to face a berserker, a thing of mindless rage they might at least understand. What they faced instead was worse. The ghost did not roar. He did not charge wildly. He moved through the hold and the corridors of the huntership with the cold, conserving, methodical efficiency of a being who had killed gods in their own temples and had long since stopped feeling anything about it, a craftsman. The young hunter had called him in the chamber above, and now the whole clan learned what that meant. He spent exactly as much violence as each hunter was worth. He did not waste motion. He did not savor it. He worked through the deadliest warriors in the galaxy, The way a man works through a task he has performed 10,000 times and feels nothing about anymore. And the blades of chaos burned, and the hold became the first room of a tomb. The hunters fought back. Of course they fought back, they were yautja, and they did not know how to do anything else. The first wave came at him with wrist blades and kombai sticks, the honored weapons of close combat, and the ghost met them in the fire-lit dark, and the cursed blades sang. And the hunters learned that the chains seared to his arms gave the blades reach, that he could fling them the length of the hold and pull them back, that the burning chains turned the entire space into his killing ground, that there was nowhere in the iron cathedral the fire could not reach. They learned that the flame of the blades of chaos did what no weapon in their experience did. It burned, primordial and unquenchable, fire that their armor could not turn and their regeneration could not outpace, the opposite in every way of the cold frost, axe that had killed their brothers in the snow, fire and ice. The old man had brought both into their ship, and now the fire was loose and the hold burned. They fell back. The veterans of the hold, the ones still living, retreated into the corridors and sealed the blast doors behind them, and for a moment they believed they had bought themselves a reprieve. The ghost of Sparta walked through the blast doors as though they were not there. This was the part that broke the clan's spirit, not the deaths, though the deaths were terrible, but the inexorability of it. They sealed doors and he opened them. They set ambushes in the corridors and he walked into them and out the other side, leaving the ambushers behind in the dark. They brought their heavy weapons to bear, the plasma casters that could level fortifications, and the old man walked through the fire the way he had walked through it in the snow. A being who had endured the lightning of one god and the flames of another, to whom the hunter's most fearsome technology was a hard rain and nothing more. They tried in their desperation, the cloaks, the bending of light that had made them the terror of 1,000 worlds, the ability to become invisible death, and they learned that it meant nothing to a creature who did not hunt by sight alone, who had stalked the dead through realms of pure darkness, who found them in the corridors whether they could be seen or not, and put them down with the same cold economy as all the rest. The things that had made them the deadliest hunters in the galaxy, their tech, their cloaks, their numbers, the overwee. Elming force that had buried him in the snow were, one by one, rendered meaningless. The clan threw the entire weight of its lethality against the old man, and the old man simply continued, methodical and patient and burning, working his way through the ship toward the chamber where the elders had ordered his study, leaving the iron corridors strewn with the proof of what their dishonor had bought. And through it all, on a high walkway above the burning hold, the young hunter, the one who read the signs, watched his clan reap exactly what he had warned them they had sown. He did not fight. There would have been no point, and some part of him understood that, the same part that had read the data and seen this coming from the first hour in the clearing. He watched the ghost of Sparta move through the ship like a slow and inevitable tide, watched the veterans he had hunted beside fall one after another to a thing they should never have caged, and he felt no satisfaction in being right, only the hollow, sick grief of a being who had seen the catastrophe coming, had screamed his warnings into the dark, and had been overruled by the pride of the ones who could not bear to admit they had erred. I told you, he thought, watching the fire spread through the corridors, watching his clan die. I told you it was a seal. I told you the discipline was the only thing keeping us alive. I told you that hurting it would not break it, and you could not stop because stopping meant admitting the dishonor was for nothing. He watched the ghost walk through another sealed door as though it were smoke, and so it was for nothing, worse than nothing. We did not just fail to break it. We woke the thing it had spent 30 years caging, and now it remembers what it is. In the chamber above, the eldest gathered the last of his clan around him. The surviving veterans, the keeper of records, the heart of the dishonored clan, and prepared to make a final stand, because that was the only thing the creed had left him. A hunter who cannot win can at least die well, and the eldest, who had broken the sacred law and ignored every warning and brought this ruin down upon his people, intended at the last to face the thing he had unleashed with whatever honor he had not already thrown away. But even now, even at the end, even with his ship burning and his clan dying around him, the eldest did not fully understand what he had done. He believed still that he faced a monster loosed, a beast of rage, terrible but comprehensible, a thing that killed because killing was its nature. He prepared to die facing a monster. He did not understand that the thing coming up through his ship was not a monster at all. That was the deepest horror of it, the one the young hunter had grasped, and the eldest never would. The ghost of Sparta was not a beast. He was a man who had spent 30 years, and the whole of his will becoming something other than this, who had buried these very blades beneath the floorboards of a quiet life, who had wanted nothing more than to be a father and leave the storm behind. The thing burning its way through the clanship was not a monster being its nature. It was a man who had been forced back into the thing he hated being, by hunters who could not leave well enough alone. And that was infinitely more terrible than any beast, because a beast kills without grief, and the old man killed with the full and bitter knowledge of exactly what he was doing, and exactly what it cost him, and exactly who he had sworn never to be again. The fire reached the chamber, the blast doors groaned, and on his walkway the young hunter made a choice of his own, not to fight, not to flee, but to understand, to bear witness to the end of his clan with the clarity that none of the others had been willing to have. He had read the signs from the beginning. He would read them to the end. The doors to the elders' chamber buckled and glowed, and the cursed fire bled through the seams. And then they came apart entirely, and the ghost of Sparta stepped through the ruin into the chamber of the elders who had ordered his study, wreathed in the flame of the blades of chaos, the chains burning at his arms, his ash-pale face cold and ancient and without a trace of mercy. The eldest rose to meet him, the last of his clan at his back, and raised his weapon for the final stand of a dishonored hunter. And the ghost of Sparta looked at the eldest, at the being who had broken the sacred law to cage him, who had carved him for 3 days, who had torn open the door he had given his life to keep shut. And for the first time since the snow, he spoke to his captor directly, in the cold and even voice of a god who had killed kings. "You wanted to know what I am capable of," the ghost said, the fire climbing in the chains. "You broke your own laws to find out. You should have killed me in the snow, hunter. That would have been the honorable thing and your kind see. Lames to value honor above all." His ash-white hand tightened on the burning chain. "Instead, you chose the cage. And now you will learn what every god, every king, every monster who ever thought they could hold the ghost of Sparta has learned before you." The blades of chaos blazed white-hot in the dark. "There is no cage," the ghost said. "That holds me. There is only how long I allow it to." And in that chamber of fire and iron, the deadliest hunters in the galaxy faced the full and terrible truth of what their dishonor had woken. With the young hunter watching from the dark, the only one who had understood from the very first that the most dangerous thing in the universe is not a monster you cannot kill. It is a man who has decided to stop holding back. The eldest had broken the most sacred law of his people to cage a god, and now he stood in the fire of his burning ship and prepared to die by the only law he had left. The chamber of the elders was a ruin of flame and twisted iron. The last of the clan stood at the eldest's back, the keeper of records, a handful of surviving veterans, the shattered heart of a clan that had numbered many and now numbered almost none. And before them, wreathed in the cursed fire of the blades of chaos, the chains burning at his arms, stood the thing they had spent 3 days trying to break and one night learning they never could. The ghost of Sparta, ash-pale and ancient and without mercy, the door they had pried open standing wide at last. The eldest raised his weapon. He did not expect to survive. A hunter who cannot win can at least die well, and the eldest, who had thrown away his honor in the snow, who had ignored every warning his own clan had given him, who had carved a god and torn open his mind in his desperate need to justify the dishonor, intended, at the last, to face the ruin he had made with whatever was left of him. "You broke your law," the ghost said, the fire climbing in the chains, his voice cold and even in the burning dark. "Your kind kills the worthy. You do not cage them. That is your creed, the clean death, the honored kill, the trophy earned in combat." His ash-white eyes moved across the eldest, across the dying clan, across the ship he had set aflame. "I know what it is to be bound by a creed, hunter. I have spent 30 years bound to one of my own making, and I know what it costs to break it." The blades blazed. "You should have killed me in the snow. It would have been honorable. It would have been clean. And it would have meant that what dies here tonight was only a clan of hunters who met something they could not beat instead of this." "We took worthy prey alive," the eldest said, "and even now, even at the end, there was the iron of 1,000 years of pride in it. It has never been done, we thought." "You thought you had caged a god," the ghost said. "You had not. You had caged a man who spends every day of his life caging the god, and you tore that cage open to see what was inside. And now you will die by the very thing I have spent 30 years keeping locked, not for your sake, but for mine." Something moved in the ancient eyes then, something that was not the cold of the monster, but the grief of the man beneath it, bleeding through for just a moment. "You did not just wake the ghost, hunter. You made me become him again. After everything I did to leave him behind, after everything I have built so that my son would never see this." The chains burned. "That is the dishonor you will answer for, not that you hunted me, that you made me this." And then 2 codes met in the fire, and the older won, the way it always had. The eldest charged the last charge of a dishonored hunter, the death rush of a being meeting its end with a weapon in its hand, and the ghost of Sparta met him in the burning dark, and it was not a battle, because it had never been going to be a battle. The blades sang. The clan that had broken its sacred law to cage a god fell in the fire of the very weapons they had failed to understand, the eldest last of all. And at the end, in the moment before the cursed flame took him, the eldest finally understood the truth the young hunter had grasped in the very first hour. He had not been beaten by a monster. He had been beaten by the consequence of his own dishonor, by the precise and total price of breaking a sacred law to take a thing he should have let die clean. He had wanted a trophy worthy of the creed he shattered. He had earned, instead, the destruction of everything he was. The chamber went quiet. The clan was dead, and the ghost of Sparta stood alone in the fire of the ship he had turned into a tomb, the cursed blades burning, the silence of the void pressing in around the dying iron. Almost alone. On the walkway above, the young hunter, the one who read the signs, the only one who had understood from the beginning, stood in the open and waited to die. He did not run. There was nowhere to run, and or than that, he would not have run if there were. He had borne witness to the whole of it, from the wrongness in the snow to the catastrophe in the hold, and he intended to bear witness to the end. He had read the signs honestly. He would face the consequence honestly too. The ghost of Sparta turned his ancient eyes up to the walkway and found the hunter standing there, unarmed, unmoving, waiting. For a long moment, neither of them moved. And then the ghost did the thing that no one, not the eldest, not the clan, not the young hunter himself, had expected. He looked at the hunter who had not fought, who stood waiting for death without fear and without flight, and something passed across the cold, ash-pale face. A recognition. The young hunter understood in that moment that the ghost had been watching him too, had marked, somewhere in the cold and total awareness of a god who counts every enemy, the one hunter who had not carved him, who had not ordered the study, who had stood apart from his clan's dishonor and read the truth of it and tried, in his way, to stop it. "You knew," the ghost said. "It was not a question. From the beginning, you read what I was and you told them and they would not listen." The fire flickered in the chains. "You were the only one of them with the wisdom to understand that the dishonor was not in failing to kill me. It was in caging me, in trying to make a thing they could possess out of a thing they should have respected enough to let die clean." The ancient eyes held the young hunters. "Your clan broke its creed. You did not. And a man who keeps his honor while everyone around him abandons theirs." Something almost gentle moved beneath the cold, the ghost of the father beneath the ghost of Sparta, does not deserve to die for their dishonor. And the ghost of Sparta turned away from the hunter on the walkway and let him live. It was not mercy exactly. The young hunter understood that, even as he understood that his life had just been spared. It was judgment. The ghost had looked at the clan and rendered a verdict on each of them, and the verdict on the hunter who read the signs was that he alone had been worthy not of death, but of living, of carrying out of the tomb the one thing the clan had earned that was worth keeping, the knowledge of what they had done, and why, and what it had cost. The young hunter stood on the walkway and watched the ghost of Sparta walk away through the fire, and understood that he had been spared to be a witness, that he would carry the memory of this night for the rest of his life, the lesson written in the ashes of his clan, the truth that the deadliest thing in the universe is not a monster you cannot kill, but a man who has been forced to become one. The ghost found his frost axe in the burning armory, the cursed blades cooling on his arms, the fire receding now, banking down toward the long sleep he had kept it in for 30 years. He found the dropship in the ruined hold, and he left the hunter ship behind him, drifting and burning in the dark of the void, a tomb of the clan that had broken its sacred law to learn what he was capable of, and had learned it completely, and had paid for the knowing with everything they were. But the victory was no victory. That was the truth the ghost carried with him as the ship fell away behind him into the dark, the truth that turned the whole of it to ash in his mouth. He had won. He had always been going to win. That had never been the question, not in the snow, not in the hold, not in the fire. The question had never been whether the ghost of Sparta could destroy the things that came for him. The question was what it cost him to be the kind of thing that could. And the cost stood revealed now, in the silence after the fire. For 30 years he had been someone else. He had buried the cursed blades beneath the floorboards of a quiet life. He had swallowed the rage, learned its patience, taught himself to be a father instead of a storm. He had built a cage around the ghost with everything he had, day after day, year after year, because he knew better than anyone in any world what was on the other side of the door, and he had given his whole life to keeping it shut, so that his son would never see it. So that the monster who had drowned Olympus in blood, who had killed the only family he ever loved in his own rage, would stay buried where the man had put him. And the hunters had pried it open, not because the ghost was weak, he had never been weak, but because they could not leave well enough alone, because their pride could not bear to release a thing they could not possess. They had reached into the one locked room of his soul and torn it open, and forced the man to become, for one terrible night, exactly the thing he had spent 3 decades swearing he would never be again. They had not just failed to break him. They had given him back to himself, and that was the cruelest thing they could have done. The ghost of Sparta drifted in the dark, the fire cooling on his arms, and felt the monster receding, felt the cold, ancient thing sinking back down behind the door, the rage banking, the man rising slowly back to the surface in its place. And the man was not triumphant. The man was grieving, because he had felt tonight how easily the cage came open. He had spent 30 years believing the door was sealed, that the ghost was buried, that he had truly become someone else. And tonight he had learned, in fire and iron and the blood of a dishonored clan, that the monster had never been gone at all. It had only ever been held, one wound away, one door away, as close to the surface as it had ever been. He thought of his son. He thought of the quiet life he had built, the floorboards he had buried the blades beneath, the man he had spent 30 years trying to be. And he understood, drifting in the dark with the cooling chains on his arms, that he would carry this night home with him. The proof that the cage he had built around himself could still be broken by anyone willing to pay the price, and the harder, colder truth beneath it. That this time, when the door came open, he had not fought to keep it shut. He had let it. He had spent 30 years believing the ghost was a thing that happened to him, a monster others had forced into being. And tonight, in the hold, when the hunters tore open the door, the man had felt the truth he had spent 3 decades refusing to face. That some part of him, the oldest and most buried part, had been waiting for permission. That the cage had a key on the inside. That the ghost of Sparta was not a thing that had been done to him. He was the ghost. He had only learned to keep him quiet. And as the burning ship fell away into the void behind him, and the long dark swallowed the tomb of the clan that had woken him, the old man with the cooling chains seared into his arms set his course for home, and wondered, with the bottomless grief of a father who has seen his own worst self wear his face one more time, whether he could ever truly go back to being the man his son believed in, or whether the thing the hunters had woken would ever fully sleep again.